there, would be a good opportunity to do that. Okay, they've started.
All right, everyone is in.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the City Planning Board meeting. If you are not on mute, if you could please mute yourselves as we get started. Stacey, the time is 5:38 and we're gonna go ahead and get going. We will start, if I can remember, that we start with our roll call and approval of minutes. So I'll go ahead and go through our list. Tori?
Here.
Here. Melissa?
Here.
Stacy?
Here.
Shannon?
Present.
Jesse is here. Who am I missing?
Taya.
Taya, thank you, Taya. I'm toggling. Taya is here. Okay, we are all present and accounted for. We also have Matthew, Deputy City Planner. Thanks again for joining us. And
Yes,
also, oh, yeah.
Because we are doing a joint meeting for the first item, I would also ask that we allow the chair of the county planning board to do a roll call for them as well.
Thank you, Matthew. Go for it, John.
Thanks, Matthew. We already know that Taya is here. She's split personality here for this meeting, but I know who she's representing. And Rich Berg, raise your hand. Dean Nelson is here. And I know that Dave Haug is here on the phone line too. Say hi, Dave.
Hi, I'm here on phone, Dave Haug.
Got it. And a couple of our colleagues are not here, and of course our planning colleagues are here to hiding at the moment. So we're Laura Burks, a very active member, is away on vacation, and I don't know where Brian Wells is. I'm a little surprised that he's not here part of us. So that's that. Thank you. And thanks for allowing us to be part of, be guests at your meeting here. We're looking forward to a good start to a good discussion.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Shannon.
may I make a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting?
I'll second it.
Stacy second. Any discussion? Okay, let's go through the roll call. Tori?
Or
Melissa?
Four.
Stacy?
4.
Shannon?
Or
Taya?
4.
And I am also 4. Okay, great. Motion passes. Approval of last meeting minutes, which would have been April. Okay, let's see. So we are going to open it up. Let me just get back to our agenda here. We're going to open it up for public comment. So we'll start there. This is general public comment for anything that the planning board has jurisdiction over. So please state your name and your address. I'll put the timer on. We have consistently been going with 3 minutes, so I think we'll just stick with that. And if you have a comment, go ahead and either raise your hand or take yourself off mute. Frank Schroeder, go ahead and make your comment, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Frank Schroeder, Chair of the Friends of Park County. My address is 477 Mill Creek Road in Prey. Friends of Park County has been an active participant in the Livingston Planning Board's consideration of the city's growth policy. Since November, we have presented more than 100 pages of written comments, data, and suggestions for specific improvements to the draft. Not all of our recommendations were adopted, but as we have testified, we have been pleased and impressed by the way our recommendations were considered both courteously and seriously by the City Planning Board. As of last night, the draft growth policy has become official growth policy for the City of Livingston. Everyone should be proud of the future the city has endorsed: compact traditional development and a strong downtown, coupled with the protection of the rural residential neighborhoods, farm, ranch lands, and natural lands and resources surrounding Livingston. So congratulations to all of you and really all of us who have participated. But we know that the growth policy is just a bunch of words unless and until it is implemented. In a period of rapid growth and skyrocketing home prices, both inaction and delayed action can be fatal to realizing the vision of the growth policy. We are heartened by the fact that the first joint meeting of the two planning boards to address implementation issues in the extraterritorial jurisdiction is occurring just one day after the growth policy was approved. We understand tonight will be devoted to getting acquainted with the growth policy and each other. So we are foregoing any testimony about next steps. But by the next meeting, we'll be ready to contribute to the critical effort of implementing the growth policy in the ETJ. Thanks for your time and service, both past, obviously, and with great hope and anticipation the future. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, I see Michelle with her hand up.
Thank you, Jesse. Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Ubaraga, and I'm at 711 Lochleven Drive here in Livingston. I just want to say thank you, and that I am enthusiastic and very excited to see our two planning boards coming together to have a conversation. I think that we've heard from the community that there's a lot of overlap in the area around Livingston, and they want to see mutual representation, and it is just the fact that we are gathering tonight is a huge accomplishment. And so I'm really grateful for your time and excited to sit in and listen to the conversations that happen. So thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Okay, is there any other public comment? And at the moment, I'm not seeing any hands up. I'm going to say second call for public comment. And if you can't figure out how to raise your hand, you can turn your microphone off and speak. Third call. Okay, thanks. We're going to close public comment and move on to our first agenda item. And again, thank you so much to the County Planning Board for joining us this evening. We're really happy to have you here. The first agenda item is the joint city county hearing, update and discussion on options and next steps for regulating the ETJ. Matthew, do you want to start out with any background on this?
Sure, I can start out with a little background, especially for our county colleagues that may not have spent quite as much time with the growth policy as we have. Let me just quickly pull up a map here to show the boundaries of the ETJ so that we can do that. Hopefully you all can see that, though I am just getting a picture of my background. So I don't know if you can actually see the document here.
There it is.
Now we can.
Okay. I still can't see it, but I will hope that you all can. So basically, these are the boundaries of the extraterritorial jurisdiction. It's a 2-mile buffer around the city of Livingston. It's being planned for in Appendix A of the growth policy. Basically, state law reads that to do any sort of regulation as the city, we have to have a plan for the area. So the intent of Appendix A of the growth policy was to basically adopt a plan for the area known as the extraterritorial jurisdiction. Those of you that have been around a long time may have heard it referred to as the donut as well. Really, the intent of this meeting is to begin a collaborative process between the city and county planning boards discussing options for potential regulation of the extraterritorial jurisdiction. Obviously, the city and the county both want to work with each other when it comes to these jurisdictions that affect both areas. Goal 1 of the county growth policy, which is linked in the memo, states working with the city to plan for the area around the city. And goal 1 of Appendix A of our growth policy now states that we should work with the county on the area around the city. So we're taking the first step towards that today. I'm expecting this to be a relatively informal discussion. The plan is essentially to have a discussion, answer any questions you may have, and then hopefully in the future come back to you with some recommendations on options for moving forward. Really the first step in the process would be the potentially setting up a planning board that meets the requirements of state law, which would have representation from both the city and those who live in the extraterritorial jurisdiction. We probably won't go that far today just because there is some differing readings of state law, which I won't go too far into, but basically there's an or clause. And if you read the two clauses before and after the or as separate clauses, it means something different than if you read it all as one clause. So it's something that the city and the county will have to have some discussions about on where we want to go with that. So today is really more of introductions, collaboration, get to know each other, answer any questions that you all may have about the extraterritorial jurisdiction. I do want to make a couple things clear. We've had some concern among especially county residents to the south of town that because they're included in this extraterritorial jurisdiction, we're going to annex the whole area. That's not the case. The city certainly won't annex the whole extraterritorial jurisdiction, generally doesn't do much annexation if we're not providing services. That has changed a little bit recently. We did do one annexation at the last meeting where we annexed the roads in an area we don't provide services. But generally, being the ETJ doesn't mean that you're going to be annexed. And I wouldn't expect to see any major changes soon. I do want to make it clear that the reasoning from the city's perspective of doing the ETJ plan is allowing us for the potential to regulate the area in the future. Because the county has subdivision regulations that apply, the city cannot apply subdivision regulations. Again, there's some differing interpretations, but potentially the city can apply zoning regulations to the area, basically up to 2 miles from the city limits. And that was really the intent of this plan, was to allow us to do that. Obviously, the city doesn't want to move forward with that without significant discussions and hopefully collaboration with the county. And I do want to make it clear that if we do go to regulate, there will be several public hearings. And before we adopt any zoning, under our zoning ordinance, every single property owner in the area to be regulated and within 300 feet of the boundaries of the area to be regulated has to be noticed by mail, which is a huge process for us, but it's something that's very important. So we can't just regulate sort of in the middle of the night, so to speak, without letting people out there know and getting their input and letting them have their say. And I think that's really important, that the city does want to make sure that this is a public and transparent process. And is really looking forward to working with the county as we start moving through this process. That's really all I have. I don't know if Mike or Lawson, if you want to add anything to that, or if we just want to sort of open it up to discussion, potential introduction and questions.
I don't have a lot to add. The only thing I'll say is, we had that city county planning subcommittee that was created as part of the city county compact several years ago. So we had been kind of working and talking about this area. And we tried to figure out a way to do some sort of neighborhood planning process. And we weren't successful in getting that done, but it was something that was discussed as part of the city growth policy update. And that board, or that subcommittee, has not met for at least 1.5 years, maybe even 2 years at this point, knowing that the city was going to move forward their growth policy update. So it's something that we've been talking about at the county level. We just haven't had a lot of opportunity to work with the city up until now. And it seems like now with the recent growth policy update, our goals relative to this area seem to align. So I think there's a good opportunity moving forward.
Jessica?
Yes, Stacy.
Could I have maybe a request, since there's no name on the Park County and I'm trying to record things, that they could either turn on their video or identify? I didn't catch the name of who was speaking.
So that was Mike Inman, Director of Planning, and then I've got Lawson here. So rather than shuffling back and forth in chairs, we're just kind of in the same
And
office.
who is Lawson?
Lawson, Senior Planner for Park County.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks to you both for the introduction. We can now open it up to board questions. Who would like to start? And this is either board or, city, county. Let's open it up and have some discussion. Does anybody want to start? Yes, John.
Thanks, Jesse. Well, on behalf of the Park County Planning Board, we really appreciate this opportunity to get together and really provide as coordinated of a effort for our citizenry, our collective citizenry. And we're looking at this from the perspective of not being, the hill people or the valley people, but the left and the right hand of the county in general. So we see this as being a great opportunity to maybe do things that haven't been done as coordinated as they have been in the past. We have, no surprise to many of you, is we have had, as individuals and comments before board members, folks who live in this, the land formerly known as the donut, there's a lot of concern. There's a lot of concern. There's also a lot of interest in potential opportunity from some folks and see it as being great. I see this as being a real opportunity for us to achieve goals to meet a lot of our collective needs. Housing is something, as Frank Schroeder noted, it's out of control. And there just is a great opportunity here to fulfill a lot of good things for those that are coming forward. I think that it's important to say that from a county perspective, we don't have the levels of speed and flexibility that it may seem that the city does at times. So we can sometimes seem pondersome and takes more time. And if things are not going at the speed that you would like, Jesse, you know how to get a hold of me. We can talk about that. But at the same time, we have a different economic base, tax base than you folks do. And so sometimes there are those who look at this as being a potential takeaway from the county. So I don't think anyone on our board believes that or sees that as being their personal opinion. But we need to be careful about how we go about doing this and really meeting the needs of most of the people most of the time. There'll be some changes, but we want to really be active in this. We're thankful for our member Taya, who's been a part of your board, who is a part of your board. And I'm not sure if Dean, where you live, your home is within that extra territorial jurisdiction or not. So we've got a lot in this. That's all.
Yeah, thanks, John. Go ahead, Dean. I see your hand up. Oh, but you're on mute, Dean, or we can't hear you for some reason. You're not on mute, but we can't hear you. Shoot, it must be a microphone problem, Dean. Okay, we'll look for you again. Technology works until it doesn't, right? Okay, John, thanks. I appreciate your comments, and I look forward to kind of thinking about through our options tonight. And I think that's really what our aim is to think about how we can move forward with this collaboration piece. And I did hear Mike Inman say something about a previous city county subcommittee, and I don't know if that's the same as creating a new city county board. This is kind of where my head's going as far as what historically has been tried, and is that something we would want to try again, or are we trying to go a little further with something a little bit more concrete than a subcommittee? But again, anybody else want to jump in?
I will jump in.
Awesome, Melissa, thanks.
I want to thank you, John, for your comments. I appreciate them. And I think quite a few of us on this board pay attention to what's happening in the county also. So I think that you're right. We have a lot of shared values, and I think we're going to be able to do a lot. And there's definitely a ton of overlap between our constituencies and some differences. So I appreciate that. And Taya has been an awesome county rep, reminding us of things when we city folk forget. So you have been represented in the city. Yes, I agree, Jesse. We've done a ton of different things. I'm interested in hearing, I guess, from the staff. So Matthew, Mike, and Lawson, what you think our options are. Because I know the city, we had this sort of apparently illegal board that had to change when I first became a commissioner. And then it took a while and it stabilized. And now we're talking about changing things again, which I understand changes how it goes. But I'm curious what you see our options as, because that's not completely clear to me. If it would be reconfiguring one board or reconfiguring both boards or creating a third board. And I don't know if that's what you all are working out or not.
Talk about that a little bit. We wouldn't, so the county board remains as is regardless, because they cover the area outside of the ETJ as well. Under state law, if we were to set up a new board, and I think probably the next step in this process would be coming back to you and having both boards either jointly make a recommendation to both commissions or each board making a recommendation to their commission, depending on if there's consensus or not and what you all want to do. But really the options for board creation, and I won't go beyond board creation because the controversy creeps in a little bit once we start talking about the regulation and how that gets done. And there's a lot of different options with that. But basically, there's two ways under state law, two different types of boards we can create. It's either a city-county board, which would require the dissolution of the city planning board to become a city-county planning board. And there's state law requirements for the membership of that and who gets appointed, how that gets appointed, and that was in the memo. Or the other option is to expand the city board essentially with members of the community that live in the ETJ. That would not require the dissolution of this board. It would be an expansion of this board, but because the membership changes significantly and there's actually would be less city representation on the board unless the city commission decided to go above the 9 members required by state statute, we would probably have to have everyone reapply for their positions on the board, basically because the composition is different. But the city board would remain the same in that case, and the county board, either way, remains unchanged. Basically, some of their jurisdictional boundaries may change a little bit, but other than that, the county board remains the planning board for the county.
Is Michael or Matthew?
Can I finish since I have the floor?
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I'm just trying to make sure I understand, Matthew. So if we went to the 9-person board, it would be 4 Livingston citizens, a commissioner, a county commissioner, a city commissioner, a county commissioner. I need some help walking through this.
So I'll just read out. So there's 2 different types of boards. There's the city county, and then there's the expanded city. For the city county board, you have to have at least 9 members, and it's 2 official members who reside outside city limits, but within the jurisdictional area of the city county planning board, basically the ETJ area. And then it is 2 official members who reside within the city limits. And I should make it clear that those 2 members who live in the ETJ may be employees of the county or county commissioners. And those positions are at the discretion of the county commission, but they don't have to be employees or commissioners. They can be citizens. And then 2 members who reside within city limits. Again, those would be appointed by the city commission, and they can be staff or commissioners, but don't have to be. 2 citizen members who reside within the city limits to be appointed by, in this case, state statute says mayor. In our case, it's a chair. 2 citizen members who reside within the jurisdictional area of the city county planning board to be appointed by the county commissioners. So basically 2 in the city and 2 in the ETJ who can't be staff or commissioners. And then the final member is appointed by the Conservation District, one of their board members. For the City Planning Board, it would be 1 member appointed by City Commission, that's a commissioner. 1 member appointed by City Commission, which may be staff, which is the current setup we have, basically 1 commissioner, 1 staff. 1 member to be appointed by the chair. And that's basically designated by the county commission, and then 4 citizen members, 2 who are within the urban area, outside the city limits, so in the ETJ, and 2 who live within the city. And then additionally, 2 members from the ETJ as well. So you basically have 4 members from the ETJ, and then 2 citizen members of the city, 1 appointed by the county, and potentially a staff, and certainly 1 city commissioner.
Thanks. And then what is the conservation district?
The county planning can probably answer that better than I can, but they generally, they're a board that does conservation related activities, often having to do with ditches.
Oh, it's like the
but
county then.
They're countywide. They would have some jurisdiction over the city, depending on what is in the city. You'll see them come up with subdivision review if we get to there ever.
So would you suggest that this is like the next step would be to consider like a recommendation to the commission on, and that would come from the city? Okay.
I'm from both. So I think the next step is really to have city staff and county staff discuss the next steps, but
okay,
the next step for you all would be each board making a recommendation to their commission on what path they would like to take. If we go down the city county planning board road, the county will have to agree to that, and we will probably have to sign some sort of interlocal agreement to do so.
and I think this is different than, I can't remember when I first was a commissioner and how the city county board was. I think
It
that
would be the same board as the board that was disbanded 10, 15 years ago.
option 1, well, we had like some city county board when I first started and it wasn't quite right for where we were. But anyway, Mike and Lawson, do you have anything you would add?
This is Mike with the county planning. So the way we kind of look at this, Matthew's right, there are options available in terms of kind of how we figure out how to regulate in this area. And I do think that not only staff, but our respective attorneys are going to have to come to some sort of consensus so that we understand and agree upon what those options are. Because right now there's a difference of opinion on those options. Once we understand what our options are, we look at this, and we've always looked at this as something that needs to be initiated at the city level. It'll be part of your growth policy. It's part of what you are, you're essentially trying to manage growth in an area that the city will most likely grow into over time. And while at the same time that you guys would initiate it, we are looking for consensus with our planning board and our county commission. So I think Matthew's right that we need to kind of figure out what those options are, and whether or not we kind of consider them with our respective boards at the same time. That's an option. That's up for consideration, or it may be even something that the city kind of figures out what they want to do, how they want to go about doing it, and they make a recommendation to our planning board for consideration and a recommendation to the county commissioners. We can kind of work through that process once we kind of come to consensus on the options available to us. At the end of the day, it's all about trying to plan for and manage growth in that area, which will most likely be, the heavy lifting will be done by the city. Even if the county were to pursue zoning in that area, we would most likely want to enter into an agreement with the city to have them administer it. That being one option, probably won't pursue that one, but that's, at the end of the day, I think the city's got to figure out what they want to do, how they want to go about doing it. I know that our county planning board, county residents, and the county commissioners want to be involved. And they want to, we're hoping that we come to some sort of consensus before we start any formal process towards regulation.
That was a lot, and that's super helpful. Thanks to both of you. And Lawson, I guess I want to make sure if you have anything to add.
No, I think Mike pretty much summed it up.
Thanks. Thanks all of you planning staffers. That's really helpful for me. And I am satisfied for now. And yield. I think Stacy had something she wanted to ask.
Okay, let's go Stacy, and then we'll go Dean. I saw Dean tried to take his microphone off. So go ahead, Stacy, real quick, and then we'll go to Dean.
Okay. I just, I mentioned this to Matthew before. I just think somewhere in all of this, whichever board it goes, whichever direction it goes, that the labeling is important, and that I know the state statute says that we can't call it anything more than city, county, but I think it's important to add in somewhere that it's the ETJ is part of it, so that people aren't confused that we're talking about the entire Park County. We're really only, this board, whatever, in whichever format that it comes in, is the city and a 2-mile radius. So we call it, because of the growth policy, the ETJ. So that's just something to keep in mind so that people are clear as to what areas that this board is going to be talking about if it comes to happen.
Okay, thanks, Stacy. That's a good point. And you froze. Were you done, Stacy?
Mhm.
Okay. Okay, Dean, do you want to give it a whirl?
Yeah, I have a very unstable audio. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm going to take my video off because I think it'll make better use of the limited bandwidth I have. So I'm going to excuse myself here. But yes, John Heitke did represent that I am a member of the county planning board. We have somewhat geographical representation just to have a diversity of opinions and experiences on the county planning board. I happen to be live at 7 Wineglass Loop East, and that is within the ETJ. I also have been a past participant in both the homeowners and the property owners association for Wineglass, and I'm aware of there are basically 3 property owners or homeowners associations up here, including Buffalo Trail, Wineglass North, and Wineglass South. None of the roads up here are county roads. They're all either owned by the HOA, or in the case of Wineglass, they're easements. I have 3 roads on my property that are easements. And so the roads are maintained by the citizenry. We go to, we don't have garbage collection. We take it to county areas. We all live off wells. We all have septic. And so the question I have, well, I'll preface it by a comment. I suggested when I got on the HOA, wouldn't it be great if we put asphalt on the road? And I almost got shot. They tend to really appreciate the remoteness or virtual remoteness of where we live. The picture behind me is the view from my office. And so it hardly represents a city environment. So the question I have for Matthew and for the members of the city board is, what is the impact of this? I recognize that there is public comment, et cetera. I expect, depending on the number of people and the way it's the geography is determined, that you probably will not be able to do anything in the short term. But what is the purpose of this? The area that I live in is basically the bottom from 6 o'clock to about 8 o'clock on your ETJ map, if that helps.
So the intent of the ETJ is not to provide city services to the whole area. It's not to annex the area. It's not to encourage urban densities in the area. If you look at our future land use map in Appendix A, I think the whole Wineglass area, basically once you get beyond the 5-acre tracts and the smaller, more developed parcels, is shown as open space and pastoral. And really that would be, if we were to regulate the area, it would need to be consistent with that, as that's one of the criteria under state statute. So the way the growth policy is written is, one of the overarching goals is infill, and one of the intents of regulating the ETJ would be to encourage growth into the city rather than out into the ETJ. So I wouldn't expect any particular changes, especially in the short term. If we were to regulate the area, the only change would be that there would be some sort of limitations on potentially on use, density, and setbacks on the property. But other than that, based on the way the growth policy is written right now, and obviously the details would have to be hashed out during the zoning process or the regulation process, the intent is to leave it as is, open space, agricultural. We don't want to see urban densities, subdivisions, and really subdivisions at all, if you take the recommendations of the growth policy into account in the ETJ. We want everything coming into the city so it can be developed on city services.
Just as a point, the covenants that the developer put into place for the Wineglass are pretty restrictive. I mean, it's effectively zoned. I mean, I have 20 acres. I have to have 75% of the residents to approve whether I subdivide. I have limitations on how many buildings I can put up. So it is effectively zoned, but it just isn't. It isn't regulated. Any contention would have to be litigated civilly rather than through a regulatory group like the City Planning Committee. So.
Okay. I had just a really quick kind of clarifying question. So Matthew and Mike and Lawson, these are sort of two options that I hear that we sort of have moving forward to work collaboratively. Are there any other, is there a city county subcommittee that Mike maybe mentioned earlier? Is that a different option where we wouldn't be shuffling boards around, or are we really limited to these two options to collaborate moving forward?
This is Mike with the county. The subcommittee was just simply a way for the city planning board and the county planning board to get together to start talk about ways to plan for growth in that area. Okay. Back when it started, we had just updated our growth policy back in 2017. And so we were kind of falling in line with goal 1. But there was no indication at that time that the city was going to update. In fact, they had done an update, but if you look back at that update, it wasn't a comprehensive update. It was just simply revisiting the older growth policy. So we just didn't have any information coming from the city side that pointed to any kind of work on behalf of the city in that area. So the subcommittee, that's why it was there. I don't know that we need to keep that going, especially if we're moving forward in a more formal fashion. Then we fall in line with what Matthew just talked about in terms of the options under state law. So I don't know that we definitely probably wouldn't need both if we start moving forward formally.
Mm-hmm. And if I understand it correctly, if we're really talking about some regulation within the ETJ, it would have to be one of these formal board options. Is that also correct?
Kind of. Let me clarify that a little bit, because I don't think I made it totally clear last time. And Mike mentioned that potentially the county could zone and the city could administer. If the city regulates that area, and again, there's some contention to whether or not we can regulate and what may have to happen and what the options are for that. But if the city were to regulate and we decide we can regulate that area, state statute gives us two options, and we have to take one of those two, which are city county planning board or expanding the city board. We don't have any other options under state law. Again, the regulation side of things is further down the road. But if the staff gets together, and I include the attorneys as staff, if the staff gets together and determines that this is something we think is viable to move forward with, really the first step, if the city wants to move under city regulations, would be to set up either the expanded planning board or the city county planning board.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Taya.
Thank you. Question about those two options. Is that what you describe as the makeup of the board? Does each option, does it have different abilities to regulate then? Or are we simply describing the makeup of the board, or whether it's the city county or expanding the city board?
Boards are basically would only be required if we determine that we want to, and in this case, it would only be zoning if we want to zone the area under city zoning. So under the city's ordinances. There are other options. If one of those other options is taken, it may be a different setup. Mike mentioned earlier that if the county were to zone and the city were to administer, we could probably do it pretty much through an interlocal agreement because it's still the county zoning and it would be under the purview of the county planning board at that point. The county planning board would have to act as a zoning commission. I'm not sure they can do that under state law. Mike, you may have to clarify. You may have to set up a zoning commission if you do that. I'm not sure what the county state law is on that, but basically it would be through the county board rather than through a joint board.
Yeah, if the county commissioners were to pursue zoning of this area under 201 county initiated zoning at the county level, they would have to set up a board of adjustments that would comprise of individuals within that district. So it wouldn't include city residents and it wouldn't include any county residents beyond that. And the Board of Adjustments under state statute would look at variances and conditional uses, things like that.
I'm curious, and maybe it would be helpful, just if the information could be put together, it's just in a way like the pros and cons of, a city county planning board versus expanding the city board.
I think after staff discusses, when we go to make a recommendation to either commission, however we decide we want that to happen, we will certainly give you much more detail on the options and the pros and cons of some of those options. In something like under state law, the city county planning board can act in the zoning commission as a zoning commission. So if we decide to talk about that option in more detail, we can talk about why that may be a good or a bad thing. That's probably the next step, and it's a little bit down the road. I should make it very clear that if we do end up regulating the area, this is going to be quite a long process. Don't expect this to happen overnight. Don't expect it to happen in 2021. We're talking an extensive period of time.
Thanks, Matthew.
Go ahead, John. I see your hand up.
Thanks. So I may be very dense at this point, but when I take a look at the purpose of regulating, including a plan for the ETJ in the city's growth policy that can do zoning and can lead to annexation, correct?
You can do annexation right now. Anything can lead to annexation. Being in or outside of the ETJ doesn't make your chances, being in the ETJ makes your chances of annexation quite higher because you're next to the city, but the growth policy doesn't say anything about annexing county property particularly. It doesn't say that we should annex certain areas. It lays out areas of development pressure, but generally we would treat annexations in that area the same way we would treat every other annexation. Generally, the city annexes if the property is already on city services, if it's an island within the city, or if it's requested by the property owner. Often when, and under our growth policy, we're really highly encouraging properties in that area when they go to develop for them to annex into the city so they can be provided services. But it shouldn't affect what properties are annexed or how they're annexed. One of the recommendations in the growth policy is for the city to explore their annexation policy, which will affect the criteria of how properties are annexed, but I wouldn't expect it, even if we did zoning, I wouldn't expect us to just start annexing willy-nilly all over the place. It doesn't make sense from our perspective, financially really, or from a planning perspective.
Sure. So then if I just follow up to that, then if the city implements zoning regulations in the ETJ, to whom do people who live in the ETJ pay their taxes?
Taxation does not change unless you're in the city. So being in the ETJ, you're still a county resident, you still pay county taxes, you wouldn't pay city taxes. You're not in the city, you're just regulated. Basically, there's potentially zoning that's imposed by the city, but nothing else would change. The city doesn't all of a sudden gain all those properties being in the city or in the tax base or unlimited authority over those. County commission essentially would still have authority over those for the most part, other than the zoning regulation.
Yeah, and you can understand, I'm sure, how if you use the Z word with people in the county, that you'll see more fireworks than you see at the rodeo. Okay.
And
Thank
John,
you.
I can, just to let you know too, I mean, the whole purpose is to try to avoid development in the ETJ that's inconsistent with city growth, inconsistent with city infrastructure. And so, you know, most likely if everything goes the way it should go as under planning, you're going to limit development in the ETJ. If people want to expand development, have higher density, subdivide, larger development, then it'll be prohibited under the zoning unless they're annexed into the city and they're rezoned and classified for a different type of growth or development.
Thanks. I appreciate both of the planning entity offices really bringing this forward. Helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Dean, I did see your hand up again. Did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand or be able to come up with a simple narrative as to the purpose of this. And so when I talk to neighbors or HOA or POA or something like that, is it fair to say that because of the proximity to the town, that there is a community, a definite community of interest in the ETJ for the what happens in Livingston and vice versa? That's kind of the purpose of it, is that it doesn't stop, city doesn't stop where the city is and county doesn't stop where the city is. So it's kind of like a transition zone. Is that a fair assessment?
Basically, the purpose from the city's perspective and from city planning's perspective is to allow us to manage growth in that area. We know that most of the growth pressure in the area around the city comes from the city. So you end up with city-style developments that are approved through the county that aren't on city services, that aren't compliant with our growth policy. So by moving forward with regulating the area, the city can implement the goals of our growth policy while managing growth so that the county doesn't see growth that's being caused by the city that isn't compatible with county development and isn't compatible with county infrastructure and availability of infrastructure, and also isn't compatible with the city growth policy and the city's desire for growth and planning. So it doesn't mean you're in the city. It just means the state allows the city to potentially allows, I should say, the city to regulate that area as a growth management tool to ensure that growth pressures from cities aren't overwhelming counties, essentially.
Well, and then so the second part of that would be, it's also fair to assume that the city is not interested in having excessive growth in outside of city limits that ultimately cause the urban donut effect, where you have decay in the inner city. Not that Livingston is an inner city, but that all the investment goes outside of the city. Is that a fair assessment?
The growth policy specifically recommends that all growth that occurs in the ETJ happens within the city. So before any subdivision occurs in the ETJ, the growth policy recommends that that property would be annexed into the city. At this point, that probably limits development to the areas adjacent to the city, and most of the future land use map, which is going to be the one of the key controlling factors of the ETJ, shows the vast majority of that area as what we're calling pastoral and open space. So remaining the densities that it is now, and remaining as agricultural and grazing land for the most part. There's very few areas that are shown different to that. The area around Green Acres, the already developed areas along 89 South there, and the area along Highway 10 that we're starting already to see some development pressures. The Voyage property, the salvage yard, those areas are shown as mixed use on our future land use map as well. But the rest of it is shown as remaining as agricultural land, essentially.
And then the last point is, so there's a three-part to the narrative. The third part is the ETJ, given the different representation models that you're looking at, the two different ones you expressed, does it provide representation for people in the ETJ that are not in the city to comment on city development as well? So in effect, does that provide a communication both directions?
Yes, so either one of the options, if we go down that road, the city planning board already provides comments on plans, obviously on growth policies, and on subdivisions. So if it were a city county planning board, or if it were a city county planning board or a city planning board, any applications in that area, though it's probably less clear with just a city planning board, but certainly with a city county planning board, all subdivision applications in the city and the ETJ would go to that board, which obviously has representation from the people that live in the ETJ. With a city planning board, certainly all city subdivision applications go to the planning board, and that would also have representation as required from people in the ETJ. So people in the ETJ would then gain a voice on subdivisions within the city and be able to make recommendations on those subdivisions to the city commission as well. With a city county planning board, likely subdivisions within the ETJ would be brought by the county, and the final decision would be made by the county commission, but they would still go to that planning board. So there would be representation of both parties on developments in basically in the whole area, ETJ and city. So it is a lot more collaborative for people that are affected by city decisions as well.
So your explanation is very complete. I appreciate it. I'll use fewer words if I'm trying to sell the concept.
Okay,
Thank
thanks. Dave, is it Dave Haug? I see you keep blinking. Do you want to speak?
Yes. Basically, I've got a couple, three comments. One, it sounds like, and I'm on the county planning board, and I'm also the rep from the conservation district, and also I live in the donut, as I call it. I have probably 350 acres there. Everything else I have is outside the donut area. But anyway, first off, it sounds like you guys are going to try to stop development in the donut area unless you hook up to annex and hook up to city sewer. So if you're 2 miles away and you've got to put 2 miles of water and sewer out there, that's going to be almost cost prohibitive. And then also on this zoning, if you guys take it over, it sounds like your long-term deal would be to zone it, or maybe short-term, I don't know. And in which case we might be under city regulations and a lot of different things we currently do out there, whether it's doing a subdivision or doing ag-related activities, you would be suddenly changing to different zoning and different problems associated with that.
Specific uses.
So do you have any comments on any of this?
Yeah, Specific uses will be discussed if we decide we can do zoning, and once we go down that road, specific uses will be discussed at that time. I can certainly tell you that we can't take away your right to do agriculture. Montana state law is very protective of agriculture. The way our growth policy is written, Appendix A, is very much encourages no development in the extraterritorial jurisdiction without annexation. I wouldn't expect to annex a property 2 miles from city limits, and I wouldn't expect the growth policy to be supportive of development out there. It's just not what was recommended through our growth policy. I think it's relatively, if not wholly, consistent with the county's growth policy as well.
So in other words, you would be trying to force development out beyond the donut. You know, you'd have instead of trying to force or bring development closer to the city, you try to push it away from the city is what it sounds like to me, because suddenly if you say you can't develop in the donut, well, then the next thing to do would be develop an area 2 miles out. Instead of -2 miles, you'd be 2 miles plus 1/10.
No, I think
it's anti. It kind of sounds like it's anti what most people like to see is, you know, draw your development closer to town and eventually, you know, do the infrastructure between the two. And long term, you know, you have a city developing outward, not leaving a donut area with nothing, and then all of a sudden your development is 2 miles out, 2 miles plus out.
The intent of our growth policy is to maintain a compact city, but that doesn't mean no development in the donut. The development would just be encouraged where the future land use map encourages it. So specifically in areas directly adjacent to the current city limits, especially around Green Acres and on Highway 10. Development jumping 2 miles out from the city, there's nothing the city can do about it. It's currently happening, and it will probably continue to happen unless the county moves to regulate that out from those areas. But that's certainly not what the city wants to encourage. The city wants to encourage the growth to be tight to the city limits and as much as possible within city limits, within our current footprint. But what we don't want to see is, or what the growth policy specifically does not recommend, is sort of the 1 to 5 to 20 acre tracts spreading out all over the ETJ, where you have sort of the medium to large lot residential subdivisions all over the place, especially away from city limits.
Dave, do you have any more questions?
Well, also on the zoning, you talked about zoning that you're eventually going to enforce outside the city limits in the zoning in the donut area. And what would be your likely things you would zone in that area?
That's a discussion for a long time in the future. Uses, densities, they have to be consistent with the growth policy, but that will certainly be a discussion with the citizens of the ETJ and of the city to make sure that we're not doing anything that is objectionable to everyone in the ETJ. I would expect uses in the ETJ to be pretty loose, as most of the uses out there already are related to agriculture. If the city were able to zone, and we did zone, anything that were there before zoning would be grandfathered in. So it's not like the city can zone something and say, oh, sorry, you can't use your property like that anymore. That wouldn't happen. But all of those discussions in more details and more specifics, if we do zone the area, we will have many, many discussions about those.
But also zoning, you say grandfathered in, but then if somebody sold a piece of property that had something that's non-compliant with zoning, in most cases that goes away when that's sold. Suddenly it's not, the guy has a non-conforming deal that is considered non-conforming and it's no longer grandfathered.
No, usually not when it sells, usually when the use goes away. So for example, if you had a non-conforming use, you could sell the use, and as long as it remains being used in our regulation, I think you have a year where you can stop the use and then start it up again. But as long as it continuously is used in that way, the property is used in that way, you would be continuously grandfathered in. It's not based on property owner, it's based on existing use. Once that use stops, you are correct, that use would no longer be allowed.
Okay.
This is Mike with Park County Planning. Dave, to one of your points, you did bring up a good point when you talk about growth in that area. If you're limiting growth, you might push it out beyond. And that's something for the county planning board to consider, because you are correct. If somebody were to put in a water sewer facility similar to what they did in Four Corners, you could have a lot of growth outside of the ETJ, not in the city, not hooking up to city water sewer. And it would kind of defy the intent of making sure that growth in that area goes into the city. So, you know, holistically, it's up to the county then to limit growth to such a degree that you don't end up with that kind of situation.
Yeah, because even on a smaller deal, even if you're looking at somebody putting in the 2-acre sites, that's just, does you do it inside that donut area? Well, they're not going to allow it at 1.5 to 2 miles out, but they would beyond the 2 miles. So you're kind of like you're nudging that development to go outside the donut area.
Yep, and you can look at other communities in the Rocky Mountain West where they did a really good job of limiting growth around the urban centers, and it pushed growth further beyond. And they've come up, you know, Boulder, Colorado comes to mind. And you end up with situations where you have a lot of people, you know, commuting and wanting to utilize the urban center, but all that development was pushed beyond an area that was restricted. So if the county freely allows growth outside of that jurisdiction, then you may run into that kind of problem. And so then, and if we're going down that path at the county level, it goes far beyond conflict mitigation. And now you're talking about comprehensive zoning, where you're zoning for density and for use, so that any kind of high density non-residential development is targeted for those urban centers where they have the capacity and ways to manage it.
Okay.
Great, thanks. Great topic to bring up, Dave, and thanks for your clarification, Mike. Okay, I saw several hands. I saw Tori and Shannon and Melissa. Do you guys all still have stuff you want to contribute? Tori, go ahead.
I just wanted to make it clear, and I think that Matthew has pretty sufficiently covered this, but the spirit of the growth policy and what we heard from the public is the public wants to focus growth within the existing footprint of the city. So any kind of regulation that might come, and again, I don't think that that's the intention of the board or the city. No one wants to immediately regulate the ETJ. But if that were to happen, the purpose of that regulation would be to, again, channel that growth back to the city. It's not to make the ETJ more like the city, but quite the opposite, to maintain the existing character of the ETJ.
Thank you, Tori. Shannon, did you have something?
I'm going to let Melissa go first. Ladies first.
Okay.
You're such a gentle man, Shannon. Thank you. And it's perfect because what I'm going to say leads into you. I want to address something that Dean brought up, and it's how do you think about it in fewer words? That is always the challenge. I guess, Dean, like what I think is this area, and this is really based on my experience as a commissioner and all these public works projects, which is Shannon's job, and also listening to the county residents come to the city growth policy public meetings. Two big things, two big goals from thinking about this area are saving money. So it's money saved for taxpayers to be thoughtful about what happens there. And that really gets into how expensive these infrastructure projects are. And then the second thing is protecting property rights. So zoning for the city, I know it's a scary word for some people. It's actually how we protect property rights. So we had people come and say, our land has been ag land in our family for a few generations, and we want to make sure that it stays ag land. And without a tool in the city, we can't protect that land from becoming something else. And so that was just like one really specific example that came to mind. And our city planning board did change the growth policy to work to protect those open spaces that are critical to our community members in or out of the city. So those are two really basic things I think of when I think of this area: saving money, saving taxpayers' money, and protecting property rights. And that's one way we do it in the city, is through the Z word. I don't know if that's helpful, but that is my experience. And Matthew can certainly correct me if I'm wrong, or Shannon can correct me if I'm wrong, since they're staffers that deal with this all the time. But yeah. I'm done if that wasn't clear, Jesse, but you're on mute.
Oh, I am on mute, sorry. Here I am talking to Shannon, who's not on mute. Shannon, are you wanting to follow up there?
Yeah, I want to be quick, but first of all, I really appreciate the conversation we're having, and I think the questions from county planning board members are excellent. I think we're very fortunate to have Matthew and Mike and Lawson helping guide this process. But I think sitting here listening to the conversation, it's evident to me that obviously with the city commission approving our growth policy just last evening, there's a lot of unfamiliarity with our document. And I think having the county planning board become more familiar with our growth policy, I think hopefully will ease some of these concerns. And I understand, I hear it at the city commission level, at the public works level. I'm currently working with the Green Acres residents who were just a year and 3 months ago still county residents. So, all very, very valid points, but I really, I have a lot of confidence in our growth policy and its very clear direction on infill and not expanding the city and protecting our agricultural and pastoral lands. So I don't know if one of the next steps before we get to really into discussing what avenue we want to go as far as city county planning or expanding city planning, but maybe having some sessions where the county planning board can maybe be at ease with reading the goals and objectives in certain parts of our growth policy that basically contradicts some of the concerns that have been brought up tonight. I will address Mr. Haug in the fact that I think the city has led by example, so to speak, at least on one occasion that I'm aware of. And, Ted Watson's property and ranch has been annexed into the city. And I think we've been good partners with Ted and allowing him to continue his agricultural desires on his property and not inhibited any of his practices in any way. And I think that was all done through an annexation agreement. So I appreciate Tori reiterating what Matthew had said. Our growth policy, I think, is very clear and not expecting people to extend sewer and water mains 2 miles to the circumference of this donut area. So with that, I yield.
Okay, thanks, Shannon. Rich, I saw your hand up. Yeah, go ahead, Rich.
One thing I think we have to be aware of is there's probably a very good chance that there's going to be some legal, if we move forward on this process, that we might be challenged legally by people that feel that they're being adversely affected. So I think we should go slow and then make sure we cross all of our T's and dot our I's. So, and then my other question is, we're working on this conflict mitigation, and I'm wondering if how that would be affected in the ETJ. And that's something that the county planning board has to talk about, but it's complicated, and that's about all I got to say. So.
Very good point. State law, certainly if the county has zoned the area. So if there's conflict mitigation zoning in that area, the city cannot zone the area. So, or if the city were to zone the area and then the county were to zone the area, it would revert to county zoning. So county, because it's in the county always has preference on regulating the area. So in terms of conflict mitigation, either basically the county would have to remove that area or not include that area in their zoning, in the conflict mitigation zoning, or that's what would apply to the area, would be that conflict mitigation zoning.
Great. Stacy, I think I saw you, and then Dean's next. Go ahead, Stacy.
Well, I just have a general comment after having traveled out of state recently and looking at things from a new perspective, having served and redone the growth policy. And I think one of the things that I learned from this past year was I had to change some of my beliefs and some of my understandings, because I think that if we think that if we just don't do anything, everything will stay the same, is not true. And so we have to become more proactive and have a plan. And I think that the growth policy, the whole purpose of that is to try to have that plan and not become just like every other city in the country that has strip malls going into it and out of it and around it. And that's the bottom line, is that we're just trying to protect what we think of as being our unique area. And it's not going to stay the same unless we have some kind of rules to follow. And if people don't like the word zoning, then give it a different name that everybody can kind of agree to as preservation. I think it's more of a preservation concept of what we have. So that's all I want to say.
Thank you, Stacy. Well said. Yeah, I agree. We all just, and we know about patience too, Rich. We're getting really good at it. So thank you both for your comments. Really good points to be made. Okay, Dean, did you have something? I thought I saw your hand again.
Yeah, I always have something. John will tell you. I'd first like to congratulate the city planning board on your success and the direction you're going. On first view, I looked at it as cynically as a land grab and a tax grab, and so I think you have some messaging to resolve there. And frankly, what I would do is I would put together some talking points and a consistent narrative that everyone involved kind of sticks to, so that you can drive that repetition and get people to understand it. And I'm not suggesting that it be something like build up, not out type of thing, but the concept of trying to concentrate in city activity in the city and not just kind of let it flow outside, I think is a really good one. And maybe one of the points of the narrative can also be, it isn't your interest to expand into areas where resources, it has extensive resource requirements of 2 miles of sewer is expensive when you don't have density. And so the idea that you have better use of resources with higher density could possibly be part of that. And when you say that, then suddenly people say you're responsible use of taxes. So I just try to connect some dots.
Perfect. Thanks, Dean. Okay, Taya, go for it.
I don't want to stretch it out too long, but I did want to support Shannon's comment. I think it's a really good one in terms of just kind of learn. I forget sometimes I was deep in it as a county resident, and there were some other county residents who were deep in it in the process with the growth policy. And it was such a learning experience in terms of just the ETJ and what it means for the city and what it means for the county. So I do, if county members want to dig in for some evening reading, or even just looking at the recommended future land use map for the ETJ, I think could be really helpful too.
Yeah, like an ETJ book club. Yeah.
Can I?
Oh, yes, Melissa, go ahead.
I would piggyback on that and say that the city planning board members would probably benefit from reading the county growth policy, which was also excellent, and a very heavy lift by the county planning board and county staff.
Yeah.
So our own book club, our own policy club, whatever.
Yeah. Go ahead, John.
Matthew, how much infill growth is happening in the city right now? Residential.
It's hard to quantify how much is a tough question. Quite a bit. We've had a decent amount of subdivision recently. We had Northtown be approved, which is sort of on the north edge of the city. So you can call it infill or not infill if you want to, but it is on the edge of the city. It was within the city. That had about 50 lots, I think, and probably 30 to 40 of those have building permits already on them and are being built on. We're expecting the next phase of that to come in soon. We're expecting the next phase of Discovery Vista, which is sort of west along the highway there, running towards Bozeman, to finalize their development. We approved ADUs under the zoning, accessory dwelling units, under the zoning in the fall, and we've seen quite a number of those being permitted. Moving forward at the next commission meeting with allowing tiny homes in the city, hopefully, obviously at the discretion of the city commission on approving that, which I would expect to encourage further infill. But a lot of the infill we're seeing is accessory dwelling units or the finalization of subdivisions sort of around the edge of the city that have been going on for a long time.
What about, there's Eagles Landing and then that area next to
Brookstone, maybe?
Yeah, Brookstone. That's quite a few units.
Yep. So we've had basically those two condo developments as well. Eagles Landing is the one behind Albertsons. I think they have about 50 units. Those are all condos. And then Brookstone, which is up by Green Acres, isn't quite finished yet, but I think their final build out is going to be probably 20 to 30 units or so. And those are all condos as well. We've been seeing, I think last year was the most building permits we've seen since 2007. And we may have actually peaked beyond our record number of building permits. We're at least in that ballpark. So we're seeing a lot of building. Yeah.
We did break the record. In talking to Jim and Brad today, just on doing grant applications for ARPA money, we did building permits for over 190 living units in 2020, and we're on pace to break that this year.
We're on pace to break that with our impact fees going up 300%. So housing we have a huge demand, and it's not being deterred by our lack of lot inventory or our impact fees at this point.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Dean.
Matthew, do those building permits include renovations of existing houses? Because I've seen a fair amount of gentrification between Main Street and out towards the west side. And that, although it does increase property values, it also reduces decay and encourages people to invest in their existing property.
We will run a building permit for anything that requires basically a structural change to a building. So the number Shannon said with the dwelling units, it won't include that, but it basically will run building permits for structural changes, roofs, and then new builds or expansions or things like that. It won't be, if someone's renovating their kitchen, for example, we won't take a building permit for that. So we won't have those numbers. But we've seen a large number of expansions and certainly a large number of people putting in second dwelling units on their property.
Yeah. Okay, folks, it's just about 7 o'clock. It seems to me, and maybe my last kind of question too for both the planning departments is, so it seems like eventually or maybe next steps is staff is going to go ahead and communicate on options, that city, county, and attorneys. And then will you as staff be making recommendations to the commission, or will you be bringing your recommendations back to the planning boards for us to also make recommendations to the commission? Will it be a staff recommendation and a planning board recommendation, similar to the way things have gone in the past?
My preference at this time, and I think, I don't want to speak for the city commission, but they've been pretty consistent on wanting recommendations from boards, would be to bring the options to you all, probably with a staff recommendation included, and have you make a recommendation to the city commission. Mike, if you want to add anything to that or contradict that, feel free.
No, I think we're in the same boat. We look at it as it's up to staff to lay out the options on the table and including both attorneys to come to some sort of consensus on those options. And then, yeah, I can see it going to both respective boards for discussion and hopefully a recommendation of the county and city commission. So yeah, staff will help provide guidance in that. But no, we're looking to the combination of these two boards to hopefully provide a direction that both commission can agree on.
Okay, great. So is it reasonable for this group to come together within the next month, and then we can reconvene this same group next month and have this as an agenda item to hear your recommendations? Does that make sense moving forward?
Boy, next month might be pushing it from the county side. I know that I think the city kind of has their legal opinion somewhat secure, or I don't know, but I know our attorney's office is even considering doing an AG or AG opinion request. If they do that, boy, that's going to take some time. And so my hope is that between Matthew, city planning, county planning, we can kind of maybe put together some options and figure out a way to not bog it down in the legal aspects of it for too long. But again, it's not up to us. It's up to our respective attorneys, and they've known about this for some time and we have not come to consensus yet. So I think that's going to be our challenge, is to figure out a way through or around that. And if not, it could be a while. So we might just need to let you all know when we're ready to put that before you.
Okay, that sounds good. Good luck. Okay, do we need to open this up to public comment before we move on to the next agenda item, or is this not a voting? We're not
voting, so we don't have to open it up to public comment. It may be worthwhile to open it up to public comment. I always like to hear what the public wants to say. I've got a head nod from John over there. So if you all don't mind, I think that would be the right thing to do.
Great. Why don't we open it up to public comment and then we'll take our break afterwards. I realize it's 7:02. Are we all good with that? Okay, perfect. And hey, I really appreciate this conversation this evening. So thank you to all folks on the call. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and open up public comment on this agenda item, which is the joint city county hearing, update and discussion on options and next steps for regulating the ETJ, or the extraterritorial jurisdiction. It took me 4 months to be able to say that in one breath. So please limit your comments just to this agenda item. And if you would like to go ahead and raise your hand, please state your name and your address, and we'll give you 3 minutes to comment. And I don't see any hands. Okay, second call for public comment. And if you can't raise your hand, just pop onto the screen. Okay, last call, public comment. Okay. No comments tonight on that agenda item. So thanks you guys. We are going to take our 5-minute break and then we'll resume with our next agenda item. You know, obviously county board members, you are more than welcome to stick around if you want to. And if you want to hop off, I get it because it's still beautiful outside. But we, again, just thank you so much for your participation, to the staff and to the board. And John, thanks for being here, and Mike and Lawson and the rest of the board members. We really appreciate it.
Yep, thanks everyone.
This is the beginning of a great opportunity for all of our citizens. And maybe something that hasn't been done quite as deliberately in the past. This is a heck of a responsibility that we have too. Thank you for inviting us all. Greatly appreciated.
Yes, thanks, John. Okay, it is 7:04. We'll see you guys all back at 7:09. Thanks, everyone.
Hey, Matthew, I have a question for you that's not an agenda item. Is this your new office?
Here's my new office. You can see the very empty bookcase behind me. But yeah, it's pretty nice to be in here.
Good.
It's it's
Sun
been good
hitting
so
your
far.
face. Yeah.
So you're not in a
Yeah.
closet anymore? Like you're not like literally like in a utility closet or whatever it was?
Yeah, and I have a window, and it's nice to have a closed off office as well. So yeah, it's been good. I also I live down the alley, so I can walk in like 30 seconds, which makes my commute easy.
That's awesome.
That's nice.
Well, congrats
Congratulations.
on your new digs.
I should
All right,
really be
everybody, it's-
thanking you all.
Yeah. There you go. Okay, we're just waiting for Shannon and Tori. Taya's here, Stacy's here, Melissa's here. What a lovely conversation. Nice board.
It's like the in-laws meeting for the first time.
I know.
Worlds colliding for Taya.
I know, right? Oh. Okay, as soon as Tori pops on, we'll get going. Unless he's making his dinner or whatever he was doing the last time.
I always like the cameo of Shannon's pets.
Yes.
Jumping in his lap in the middle of a.
Oh, who are we gonna
Still
get?
there?
Oh, the
Oh,
cat.
another one. Ooh.
Cute. Okay, all right, well, let's get back to it, everybody, because it's 7:10. So, all right, next agenda item, we're gonna need some updating on here. So here's the next agenda item is appoint planning board member to present at the June 22nd City Commission meeting on growth policies relationship to the Northwestern Railroad overpass underpass. Matthew, fill us in, please.
I'll do the best I can. I'm going to lean heavily on Commissioner Newts on this one because I listened to that hearing and I wasn't quite clear what the commission was asking. So I'm going to try to summarize it. And if Commissioner Newts, if I haven't summarized it correctly, feel free to correct me. Basically, at the commission's, not their last meeting, but the meeting before, they had a discussion on putting the railroad overpass underpass at the northwestern side of town onto the ballot to fund that piece of infrastructure. At that meeting, they requested that, and they're gonna hold a meeting on this, a community meeting on June 22nd. At that meeting, they requested that the planning board provide someone to be available for that meeting to present, to give an interpretation on whether or not the growth policy supports that and sort of the growth policy's interpretation on that project. Did I summarize that all right, Commissioner Newts?
I think that sounds like a good summary. It wasn't like explicit exactly what the ask was. I think it was what's the planning board's perspective on how the growth policy impacts or influences this decision. And so wanting to just make sure we included, because that was part of delaying that decision, was waiting for the community to have this dialogue that we've been having for the last year plus. And so we want to like include this in the next decision, which is how do we move forward with this infrastructure project that people have been wanting for decades, and make sure that the growth policy is somehow informing it. Yes.
Really, your action today is for someone to hopefully volunteer to be at that meeting and be able to summarize the growth policy in relation to that piece of infrastructure. Does anyone want to volunteer for that?
You know who I'm looking at? That's right.
I was going to ask, can we nominate people?
Yeah.
Do we have a person with a PhD in transportation planning?
Mhm.
Oh, I'm so
Great.
glad you raised your hand. Good, great.
I'd be happy to.
I nominate Tori Lines for the to represent the city planning board at the next city commission meeting on June 22nd.
Would it be, Chair Wilcox, would it be prudent to have a board-wide discussion about what we all think about how that what the growth policy would say about that?
You know what, I think that's a great idea, because I certainly have, you know, if I was nominated, which I'm not, but if I was, I have some thoughts on that. So I'd be happy to have that discussion. We do have a motion by Stacy. So does anybody want to second that?
I second it.
Taya wants to second. Do we want to have board discussion now, or let's finish the motion and we can talk about it as a board to help you if you get nominated and approved?
Board discussion first, please, as if we do approve the motion, technically we have finished the agenda item.
Oh, shoot.
And
Okay.
we have to open it up to public too, right?
Public
Before we vote. Is that right? Okay.
Okay, so we have a first motion by Stacy, a second by Taya. Here's board discussion on nominating Tori. Who wants to go first?
So can we use this time, I think, as discussion to cover that question that we just had about what would we cover as a consensus for the growth policy? Okay.
Do you want to start, Stacy? Do you have, do you want to throw something in there? Or?
Can I jump in?
Tori has it.
I think that it's important. I think that what we're discussing is our interpretation of what the growth policy would suggest for that crossing. So we're not discussing what we personally think are the merits of the crossing, but rather what the growth policy would suggest.
Right. I don't think I want to go first. I have to collect my thoughts on that.
Can I was actually hoping maybe that Tori could go first, since he's the one that just got nominated in a second. But I don't.
I'd be happy to start. I think that the growth policy promotes infill development and an avoidance of outward expansion. And I think that that's kind of like the crux of the growth policy. We've had this discussion before when we were talking about elements of the growth policy, and infrastructure can facilitate accessibility, and accessibility can facilitate and trigger growth. And so adding accessibility to the north side, particularly the northwest side, which is not currently built out, in my interpretation of the growth policy and of the theory and observation of planning, is that creating that accessibility would direct growth to the northwest side. If that growth were to happen contiguous to existing development, I don't necessarily think that that would be in violation of the vision of the growth policy. However, in general, adding accessibility and directing growth, I mean, that would, I think that would instantly direct growth to the northwest side. I think generally that is in violation of the core vision of the growth policy.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I just might put in my 2 cents too on that one. I also think that the growth policy had especially from the community comments around the active transportation piece. And so if there was a way to encourage more active transportation from the north side to the south side, rather than make it more available to vehicles. I think of that active transportation piece because I know that there has been discussion around maybe a pedestrian bridge over there in lieu of, or in addition to, a underpass or overpass. So I want to think about that active transportation piece too, and that connectivity piece for safe routes to school from the north side to the south, or safe routes to anywhere on the south side. Anyway, who's next?
I'll go next. So I concur with what Tori said and what you've said, Jesse. But I may have asked this question too when we had the discussion on the transportation section. So infill is defined as developing within our current city limits, correct?
Mhm.
So we still have portions of Discovery Vista, Northtown, the Branding Iron that are all in the city limits. So where do we distinguish, or how do we distinguish providing additional access point across the tracks based on the potential for full build out of those lots, or that property currently annexed into the city on the north side of the tracks?
Mhm.
And when we know we have intersections that are failing on their level of service requirements, how do you distinguish between providing accessibility to properties currently annexed and not promoting future growth out, which I do concur the growth policy is clear about, but providing adequate transportation to north side residents?
Go ahead, Stacy. Are you done? Are you ready to move on, Shannon?
I'm done. I yield.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Okay. No worries. Go ahead, Stacy.
Well, I was wondering, because I had the same thought, Shannon, because you're trying to service the people who are within the city limits currently. And we all know that the 5th Street crossing is so close to the B Street crossing that it causes major traffic issues at peak times. And I think, Melissa, you said once that, it's never going to get a good rating on the 5th Street. It's always going to have its issues. So I was wondering if we couldn't in some way phrase it to limit it to, we're discussing our current city limits. We're not trying to say that because our premise was to have infill is within our city. So not to say that it would promote growth beyond the current city limits. Does that make sense? I think we we had this discussion about looking at the pedestrian bridge, which is probably still necessary. I think that's a great idea for bicyclists, for pedestrians, but I still can see that we also need to have another railroad crossing, and that it would potentially promote some growth beyond our existing city limits, but I think we have to service the people within the city limits right now. I yield.
Jump in.
I'm sorry, who wanted to jump in? Michael?
I mean,
Matthew?
So I think there's two specific goals in the growth policy that sort of address these points that you're all talking about. It's under goal 8.2. Objective 8.2.1 reads, improve traffic flow to the north side of the city in accordance with the future land use map of this growth policy, which gets to Tori's point on if the improvement is in consistency with the future land use map. The strategy under that also reads, provide safe and accessible crossings for pedestrians and bicyclists across railroad tracks, which gets to Jesse's point on if there is going to be an improvement, the growth policy very strongly recommends that it includes multimodal transportation options. Objective 8.2.2 reads, develop additional grade separated crossings to serve areas of planned growth, which again goes back to Tori's point, and it's a distinction you all are going to have to make. is putting an additional grade separated railroad crossing at that location consistent with serving areas of planned growth and consistent with the future land use map, because it's pretty clear in the growth policy that there is a recommendation for additional crossings, and especially additional pedestrian and bike crossings, but also additional vehicular crossings. Really the crux of the interpretation for you all based on those two objectives is it consistent with the future land use map / areas of planned growth?
Mhm. Go ahead, Melissa.
Matthew, can you please screen share the future land use map?
Mhm.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Tori.
I think there's one more point which we haven't touched, which I believe to be countervailing, which is housing affordability. And one thing that's just an inherent challenge in planning, in planning in general, and in trying to direct growth in general, is that if and when we do make decisions that limit growth, that has an effect on housing prices. So now I don't think that that directing growth away from current centers or current areas of the city's footprint is the way to do it. When we make a decision, or even a recommendation to the city commission that we avoid something that would lead to development, that's going to have an impact on housing affordability.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and there's really no easy answer to that. But that's something that we haven't touched on, is that if we, especially if we say do not do the crossing, that does have a direct impact on what a relatively direct impact on affordability.
And if I can just ask one clarifying question too, that the commission would like to put on the ballot. Are there options to where the underpass overpass would go still, or are they just looking at that one option that's furthest out as far west as they could go? Is that what they're talking about?
So I can respond to part of this. So the way that it was proposed to the commission was with a specific price tag that happens to be a crossing further from the city center. And the ballot language would not include a location.
Okay.
So that was one concern, is not having any idea of location means that the community doesn't know what they're signing up for. And another concern is, well, I think that was the biggest concern. So I think what could be useful is what was already discussed, as the specific location not being supported by the document, but also what does the document support? I think that would be helpful, because just like the county planning board isn't super familiar with this document, the city commission certainly is more familiar, but they have not been working on it obviously for several months, except for me. Okay, so that caveat is, I don't know what the city staff, I don't know what the city staff's recommendation is. So the city commission, is one perspective, and the city staff might make different recommendations in terms of where they think that the crossing should be. So I cannot speak for the city staff, because I don't know if there is a recommendation. I mean, because it's been a while. There was recommendations in the past, but that was like over a year ago. So things might have changed.
So is the question in front of the planning board then for the representative to just merely speak from a planning board perspective that a crossing is important to have from a planning perspective and not specifically the location of one? Or is it important to say the location as a recommendation from the growth policy?
Do you want me to speak to that?
Whomever, I don't know. I'm just getting some clarification.
Okay.
Sure.
I would be happy to hear what Matthew has to say too, because he was at that meeting, but my understanding is like, they would like more information from the planning. We would like more information from the planning board. So I think it's important if we're in consensus on what the growth policy recommends is not like what is not recommended, and then like what the growth policy would be open to. I think both of those things would be helpful because we have to make a decision at the commission. And so the more information we have from the board, that, you know, the more informed our decision will be. Is that helpful, Stacy?
I think so.
Because the commission already knows that we need a crossing. Like everybody on the commission like has been hearing about it forever. And so, yeah.
So this is like an informed decision that they're looking for from a member of the planning board. Yeah, go ahead, Tori.
So I'm not trying to preempt any further discussion, but I'm thinking that something reasonable would be for me to draft some kind of statement and then share it with the members of the planning board to, and I don't want to be like workshopping it because, you know, we're volunteering and this is another thing to add to my list. But I would very much solicit substantive comments if what I come up with members of the board don't feel represents what our discussion was this evening.
Is that like okay to do, Matthew, for him to prepare a statement and send to you to send to us for feedback as a
Yes, as long, yeah, send it to me and I can send it to you. And it may be, just as we talk through this, it may be that the best thing to do would be for Tori to talk about the ambiguity in the growth policy and sort of how the growth policy can be interpreted and what it says about it in more general terms and how a potential crossing could be consistent or could not be consistent with the growth policy depending on its location and potential impacts and things like that.
So would that include things like citing the specific strategies and goals from the growth policy itself to say, you know, here's what we said in section 8, blah, 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 to then say, here's, you know, this is what it says and this is what we meant by that or type of thing, something.
Yeah, and I've taken notes from the goals and strategies that Matthew mentioned. So I'll get into those details when I get down to writing it.
And you can always talk to Matthew too for clarification or whatever.
I think that makes sense. Okay, so we have a plan moving forward. Do we want to finish up this vote? Make it official?
Before we do that, can I just try and quickly synthesize what we talked about? Just to be sure we're kind of all in agreement. I like Matthew's framing that basically the growth policy is somewhat ambiguous. There is a part of the growth policy that specifically says that we need more crossings to the north side. There is another section of the growth policy that discusses the importance of active transportation when considering the development of new infrastructure. And then I'd say third was the point that I made in the beginning, which is that directing growth away from the existing footprint of the city is discordant with the general themes of the growth policy.
Is what?
And housing affordability. Did I skip anything?
I just couldn't hear you. That was all. The third one, I just couldn't hear all of what you said.
Oh, I'm sorry. The third one was directing growth away from the existing footprint of the city would go against the spirit and the vision of the growth policy. And then fourth was limiting accessibility to the north side would stymie development, which would have an effect on housing affordability.
Okay.
Does anybody have issue or think I missed anything?
And maybe I would just, and I don't know what the group thinks, but you know, that the decision on where to place that overpass, underpass is also, you know, somehow tying that piece in, you know, I don't know. And then I don't want to like say my opinion per se, but it seems like where you place that overpass, underpass could help with being more consistent with the growth policy as opposed to being more against it. And so maybe making
That's
that
great.
point too.
The location matters, and the location could
Yeah.
determine whether or not it's in accordance with the vision of the growth policy.
Mm-hmm. I think that would be great to keep that in there or add that to it. Anybody else have any thoughts for Tori or the group? Okay, let's go ahead and vote.
I know our public is dwindling, but we are voting, so we need to take public comment.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. I am sorry, public. Gosh, I'm out of practice. Okay, we're going to take a vote on the motion that Stacy made to nominate Tori to present to the commission on June 22nd. And I will go ahead and open it up to public comment. Please state your name and your address, and I'll give you 3 minutes. Go for it. I don't see any hands, so second call for public comment. And I know you guys all know how to raise them. Just kidding. Okay. Third call for public comment. Okay, we'll close it. Thank you. All right, let's vote. All right, we'll go through roll. Okay, Tori.
Yes.
Melissa.
Yes.
Yeah. Stacy.
Yes.
Shannon.
4.
Taya.
4.
And I am also 4. Okay, that motion passes. Excellent. Thank you, Tori, for volunteering. We really appreciate you. Okay, the next discussion or agenda item is discussion on planning board responsibilities vis-a-vis preliminary plat applications. Matthew.
This is a very dry presentation. Before we start, I'm going to give you the option, since it is 7:40, if you would like to push this item and the next item, which is also not particularly pressing onto the next agenda. We don't have any items currently for the next agenda to discuss.
Melissa, go ahead.
I say yes to the next, to the plat application, yes to postponing it. And the last one, I don't think it's the purview of the planning board unless somebody can explain to me how taxation is the purview of the planning board.
Reason that is on the agenda is because when we removed that goal from the growth policy, there was a specific request to me in the motion to discuss whether or not the planning board would like to write a letter to the commission requesting that they lobby for local option taxes. Now, if there's not interest in doing that any longer, we can say that and we can move on from the issue, and we don't have to discuss it anymore.
Well, I think local option taxes are of interest to the community. I just don't know that it's a planning board issue but I welcome a challenge on that thought because
Madam Chair.
Yep, Shannon.
Can we just postpone this one for into the future?
Let's keep them both on for next time. And maybe we can start with the plat subdivision training, and then we'll put the second so we make sure we hit it. And then maybe Melissa, that taxation question is just a good discussion topic for Because I'm interested to actually think about the planning board making a recommendation on that, if that's something that would be pertinent for us to do.
But
Madam
Jesse?
Chair,
Oh, hold on,
Shannon,
go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Shannon, and then Stacy.
I don't see any issues with the planning board making a recommendation to the commission to pursue that personally. Matter of fact, I welcome it.
Okay,
And really, they have the authority to move forward with it or not.
okay. Yeah, thanks for your comment. Stacy, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say that I just didn't remember that as a motion. But if we removed it as a goal, then I guess there were some people who did think that it was worthy of future discussion in general. So
Mhm. Okay, thanks. I feel like I remember it, but I don't know, it may have been a while ago, but I would appreciate keeping it on there just for discussion's sake. So if everyone's in agreement, my suggestion is we keep the two that we're pushing back as 1 and 2 agenda items next month. We'll make sure I think we should make sure we get that subdivision training in, because that's a long time coming. And then have this one as the second, and then we'll go from there with whatever else has to come along. Okay, everybody feel good with that? Any more discussion before anything else we have to do before we wrap things up, other than
I've got a couple very quick items, hopefully,
okay.
if you don't mind. The city commission is going back to in-person meetings at some point, and it doesn't have to be tonight. We should discuss whether or not the planning board is comfortable going back to in-person meetings as well. We don't need to have a discussion on that tonight, but it may be an item for the next meeting as well.
Okay, we can chew on that for the next month.
could we also have any information on any kind of possibility of hybrid formats?
The city's been working on that. We don't have the technology right now from what I've heard. But hopefully if we decide to go back in August, hopefully we'll have some option. It may be longer than that. We're gonna have to try to set it up. I know the city commission has discussed that with the city manager as well.
Mhm. Okay, I have one more question too, and this is simply because it's come up quite a bit publicly and in the commission meetings. Is it pertinent to have you, Matthew, city staff, give us an update on the Hart K Ranch situation? Is that something that the planning board would get no information on?
I am not going to do that just because there's been a lot of sort of legal opinions flying around. It's not in the planning board's purview right now unless they come back for another subdivision application. Just to keep you all completely out of what could be a legal issue, I don't think it's appropriate to discuss at the planning board. If you all want to call me or stop by the office, I'm happy to chat about it. Honestly, I don't have that much information to give out just because there's so many things and so many that are up in the air and so many complications with that property right now. So I'm happy to talk about it, but probably not at the planning board.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that.
One other thing that was discussed at the city commission was expanding the planning board to allow for non-freeholders to be on the board. The city commission basically asked the city manager to come back with a way for them to do that. So I expect to see that at the next commission meeting. If that is, basically it would be an ordinance change. So if that is changed, we will relist the planning board positions to allow for non-freeholders. With this last round of applications, we didn't receive any applications that qualified for the position.
But I have a question on that. How can you do that? Because the statutes say that it's a constitutional issue. So how can a city go and change what's law? Until the city.
The city's not changing what's law. Basically, the current number, the same requirements apply. So for the 7 that are currently planning board members, they would still have to be freeholders. Those requirements apply. Under state law, that's a minimum, so you can add more to that. So basically the way to allow non-freeholders without breaking state law is to add more members that don't have that freeholder requirement. So that's what I expect the city manager's recommendation to the commission will be. So we will continue to follow state law. It will just potentially be, and this again is at the discretion of the city commission, potentially be a larger board with what sounds like 2 members that don't have that freeholder requirement attached to it because they're extra members as allowed by state law.
Yeah. And that was in the discussion I remember we had originally around that option. Okay, anything else from you, Matthew? Okay, anybody else want to have any last parting comments before we adjourn?
I do.
Go for it.
I want to just address the hybrid topic. Yeah, I want to confirm what Matthew said, that it sounds like before we have a very nice setup, that like the very nice setup might take a few months to get it together. But I think there will be a lower tech option for the city commission where people could phone in. So potentially that would be an option for the planning board if the staff can handle it, because it'd probably be on Matthew, I'm guessing. So I don't want to speak for Matthew, but because he doesn't have an assistant like the city manager does. So that's a thing to discuss. And then I also just want to thank you, Tori, for your willingness to come forward on one of the most difficult topics in Livingston, the crossing.
My pleasure. Hopefully I don't regret it.
You will be fantastic.
Yeah,
you'll be fantastic. And I want to thank also Shannon and Matthew. When I first became a commissioner and came onto the planning board, we had exactly zero staff members coming to meetings. So you can imagine how different those meetings were, and the amount of information board members had was very different. And the presence of both of you has really enriched these meetings. We have a lot more information and are better educated on city issues. And also, Matthew, you do a great job of keeping us on track and also answering the most difficult questions from the public. So thank you for that. And yeah, and there's a lot of contentious issues happening in the community right now, as you can tell, related to planning. So I appreciate, Matthew, that you are shielding the planning board from some of that, the difficult conversations, so we can stay on track and keep moving forward on these important planning topics. That is all that I have to say. And I'm not going to add to any of the topics you already discussed.
Okay. Stacy, what you got?
Well, my one comment was I from the meeting we had earlier with the county planning board. I do think that we should keep in mind coming up with some kind of simple explanation, description of the joint or the purpose of the ETJ, and whether, I think it was Dean who said, came up with that slogan of infill is in, or I don't know, I wrote it down somewhere, but I really think that we do have some responsibility to, with the growth policy, to do a little PR work on it in some form, and I don't know what that is, but just to, I don't know, get some kind of, it's getting referred to now as the growth policy says this, the growth policy says that. Well, is there some way, I don't know, I just feel like we need a little bit of PR work, positive PR work.
Can I speak to that?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
I want to acknowledge that Matthew has already been doing that, whether anybody has noticed or not. I have seen many quotes from Matthew in the newspaper where he states the top 4 priorities of the growth policy. And I agree with what he said. Potentially we could sign our names on that kind of a statement and submit it to the paper as like an LTE or an op-ed as a joint statement. But Matthew has been doing that. It's just maybe people haven't been reading it. So we could,
No.
we could amplify that by supporting
Yes.
Matthew's message potentially. Mhm.
Yeah. And when you're trying to, obviously from the county perspective, it seemed like, very much so worried about things that the city's going to gobble up the county or, within the ETJ. So I think from that perspective, a simple slogan, tagline, just like we came up with the 4 things that the growth policy did. Well, that's 4 things that we are able to say the growth policy is doing. You don't have to read the 300-page document because that's the essence of it. So we need to have the essence of what is the purpose of a city county planning board or concept of working together. We don't, whether it's the one version or the other version. I just think there's a need for something to
Can
work
we
on.
just make a motion to put this on the next agenda?
Sure.
If we wait a little while until we have a more solid idea of what we're doing before we start lobbying for it.
On a future agenda then, instead of the next?
On a future agenda.
On some future agenda?
Yeah. And my thought as we had that really productive, first agenda item with that group was, we, in sitting through the commission meetings and listening to the folks, who say that the county individuals don't pay attention to what's going into the city, therefore we have no idea. I see this as an enormous opportunity for education to the county residents, because if a collaborative board, whatever way it shakes out, would really help share that information out, especially with Dave, I guess, just I feel like there was a lot of clear, there was like maybe an aha moment a little bit for some of the members of that planning board when we started talking about what this really means and what our growth policy is really trying to do. And so I'm really hopeful that that collaboration helps with that communication in the county so that we don't hear that as much as we do now.
I think it would be really helpful. There's definitely like rumors that float around. If you hear those, or just start telling people to contact me, and I can sort of explain to people what may or may not be true, or what's correct, or what's happening, or what it means, rather than it sort of go through the grinder of the rumor mill, and then nobody reaches out to me because they don't know who to reach out to because they're in the county and they've never dealt with me before. So just telling people like, hey, reach out to city planning, and I'm always happy to talk to people about it.
I agree, Jesse. I think there's just so, it's like very emotionally loaded as well. And I think like it definitely a lot needs to happen before people are just noticed, or, however that process goes. Because I remember I came into the growth policy process and I was like, what about the ZTJ as a county resident that, and then I learned more about it and understood it better. So I do think that process is going to be so important.
Yeah, great.
A bit more complex, but than what we all may have thought of at one point, but
yeah. Okay, anybody else? Man, it was great to see everybody. Great meeting, good times. Go ahead, Shannon.
Sorry, I didn't hit mute in time.
Oh, that's okay.
I'm going to make it really quick because I want to go garden and eat some dinner. But I just want to celebrate in our successes, and I really want to thank Matthew, Martha, myself for getting this site plan process in order and approved by the commission. And I just want everybody to know that we received our first submittal here about 2.5 weeks ago, and I just can't express the process is going to benefit our community, and definitely make sure developers are doing things that are consistent with the growth policy, consistent with our design standards, and it's a great thing, and it's going to really, really increase these condo developments and projects that don't fall under the subdivision review. So I just want to let everybody know we are moving forward and making a difference. And we owe a lot to Matthew. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
That's such good news.
Yeah, we're so lucky. Thank you, guys.
You guys are the best.
And are there a lot of subdivision reviews in the future coming up or not?
So we have not received any applications. We've had discussions for projects. Timelines certainly are not. There doesn't seem to be a sense of urgency. So no, I don't think we have anything in the next couple months. In my understanding, now maybe this fall we may see Discovery Vista. And shortly after that, possibly the next phases of Northtown.
Maybe when the price of lumber goes down.
I was going to say, it's like the price of your car for a, thing of sheetrock or whatever.
One other thing that comes to mind, I would just ask, I enjoy really looking at all of you at a screen, but I'd really like to see you in person at some point. And I really think it would help make our meetings a little more efficient, especially having all the documents in front of us. So I would encourage us all to think about going back into in-person meetings, hopefully in the near future. And then my last comment would be, I think it's great to educate and get the word out about the growth policy, and maybe on that future agenda item, we can take our 130 strategies and maybe narrow them down to 10 or 15 talking points that we can all promote to the community, not only city residents, but county residents. I yield.
I should note we do have an executive summary as well. So if someone is looking for the bite-sized version, there is one that was included with the commission approval of the growth policy. So send them to there. I will hopefully have all of that stuff on the website tomorrow.
And I just wonder, are we going to get a final finished copy for each planning board person, or how did that end up? I mean, I have mine that's still got the red lines, but were there any changes in the end, or is that final one
It can be yours at a very low price of $50 of copy.
They have them in the library if you don't want to print your own.
And we need like a group photo. We need like a group photo.
Next meeting in person.
Yeah, like a group photo with us holding our yearbooks. I mean, our growth policies.
We should all sign them.
Yeah, I want you all to sign mine.
That's exactly it. With a little personalized message.
I like that
If
idea.
you want a paper copy, let me know. I'm sure we can do that for you. We don't have a color printer in this building yet that can do large numbers of pages, so you may have to wait a little bit. There were no changes. The only change is the cover doesn't say draft anymore. So the last version of the growth policy, no draft on the cover.
Yay. High five, virtual. Go team.
Okay, anything else? We ready? All right.
Ready to go.
We're going to adjourn. Thanks again, 7:57 p.m.
Everyone.
We will see you all sooner than later.
Enjoy your
Thanks,
evening.
everybody. Enjoy
Happy
the
summer.
garden. Happy summer.
Okay. Bye.